After the meal, the ewers with rose water and the fine linen serviettes were passed round again, and the pleasanter half of the evening began. The rather severe bearing at table during the meal, which was in some sort a continuation of the official reception, relaxed. The slaves lit the oil lamps on the capitals of the Corinthian columns, for the night shadows had enveloped Jerusalem. The light of great stars pouring down from above mingled with the softer glow of the oil lamps and the candelabra. Thus we lay on our couches and listened to the gentle melodies of the harp players behind the curtains. When the remnants of the meal had been removed and smoking censers distributed between the columns to freshen the air, I had the opportunity to make the closer acquaintance of my dinner companions. The 5 sons of the old high priest were all men of the highest education. Apart from the official training which they had undergone in preparation for their high positions in the priesthood, they had had the benefit of a wide range of education by private Greek teachers, slaves purchased for that purpose by their father. The range included Greek history, mathematics, astronomy, and rhetoric. They had a perfect command of the Greek and Latin languages and literatures. Were it not for their Jewish habit of gesticulation and their Alexandrian accents, it would have been difficult to recognize them as Jews. They would have been taken, instead, for Ascalonites or even for Greeks. The old high priest had rounded off the education of his sons by sending them to Alexandria, where they had also taken a part in all the sports. Though they were not particularly muscular, they were tall, and their bodies were the bodies of athletes. Hanan, the youngest, who bore his father's name, was likewise his father's favorite. He bore a closer resemblance to the old man, too, than the others. He had the same energetic lips and jaw. With his thick, curly hair thrown back from his forehead, he, like his father, called to mind a lion. The hair of his beard and head was thicker than his brother's, and he was especially proud of his beard. He questioned me concerning the most recent political developments in Rome, a subject in which, it appeared, he had a particular interest. He asked for news of the Caesar, who had withdrawn to Capri, and wished to know who was likely to be his successor, and whether Sejanus, Tiberius's chief adviser, was much spoken of in this connection. His brothers were more interested in sport, and what they were intent on was the latest sporting news from Rome. They asked me the name of the most popular gladiator in Rome, and wanted to know if I had ever seen him in the arena. They also inquired eagerly when the emperor planned to arrange the next games. I cannot say what their priestly qualifications were, but I cannot imagine that these cultivated young men could have been profoundly interested in the severe, unfriendly, and complicated ritual which their difficult calling made it essential for them to know. Nor can I doubt but that they were thoroughly wearied by the monotonous ceremonial service, which consisted of preparing sacrifices and of watering the sheep from a golden laver before bringing them to the altar. They were weary, too, of that eternal singing and flute-playing by men musicians only. I did not find it difficult to believe that if it were not for the great wealth which their priestly office supplied them as long as they lived, they would gladly have relinquished the priesthood for some other calling. They were, indeed, not without sympathy for our gods and our customs. The dying rays of the sun poured over the sand bastions and shone back from the wilderness of white roofs. They twinkled on the clustered tops of the cypress groves and took on a silvery tinge as they were reflected from the shimmering olive trees. In the opposite quarter of the heavens, a mighty hand was drawing a thin veil of clouds over the city, and a milky mist was diffused through the air. As the darkness deepened, myriads of lights sprang up among the houses, and the moving points of fire, which were the torches of the watchmen, illumined the bases of the towers about the temple area. The wings of the night, suggestive of the wings of those mystic birds which they call cherubim, spread out gradually over the temple itself, and above the canopy, as it seemed, glimmered the light in the summit of the Antonia Tower. A shower of faint star-lustre came down, with mournful and dreamy effect, on the stretches of the city and temple. The old high priest had had his couch placed next to mine, and the desultory conversation finally settled on the troubled condition of the country and the difficulties he was having with the unruly Galileans. I became aware, gradually and in a fragmentary way, that the priestly power was again confronted with one of those possessed and fanatical individuals who believed themselves to be the carriers of a divine mission of prophecy and of a special message from on high. This time, it appeared, an exceptionally dangerous figure had emerged. By one means or another, he had managed to persuade the common folk that he was the reincarnation of one of their ancient prophets, famous in story and legend for the wonders he had performed, and as such he had gathered about him an unprecedented following, which was persuaded that he was the bearer of God's promise of redemption and liberation. Now, lying on our couches on the open hall of columns, we discussed the man Yochanan, who, because he called the people to dip themselves in the waters of Jordan, had become known as the Baptist. At first, Hanan and his sons were, for some reason or other, loath to admit me to this conversation. Apparently they wished to conceal from the Gentile in their midst the story of the queer prophet. During the early part of the evening, the sons of the high priest entertained me, as was their wont, with accounts of gladiatorial shows, Olympic games, and gladiatorial conquests. Only the oldest son, the former high priest, conversed earnestly with the old man on the disturbing events in Galilee and the Judean wilderness, while the others distracted my attention with their idle chatter. But I kept one ear cocked toward the half-whispered conversation and caught much of its drift. "Where did you say he comes from?" the old man asked in Aramaic. They were not quite aware that I had already made some progress in this jargon, or they might have kept their voices lower. "Galilee." "Galilee," his father said, and his beard shook scornfully. He repeated the contemptuous popular saying, "Can anything good come out of Galilee?" I had been half listening to Theophilus. I had also been telling Hanan, the youngest son, vaguely about the latest scandals in Rome. But at this point I broke in on the conversation of the others and asked, "Have any disturbances taken place in the province of the Tetrarch?" The old man answered, "Disturbances? By no means. And in any case, it is none of our business. We are quite sure that Herod Antipater can handle the rebels in his territory. He has always done it quite well. We were talking about the troublemakers in Galilee, an abominable place, a hotbed of rebellion. If not for the Galileans, we could sleep comfortably of nights. But one day it's an outbreak of banditry, the next day it's a Messiah, an impossible, credulous mob ready to follow every adventurer. And it's not only the zealots. We have those absurd super-pietists, the Hasidim, the Essenes, who are forever washing and baptizing. They baptize everything, their bodies, their vessels. They'll be baptizing the sun and moon next." And the old man finished with a burst of angry laughter, in which his sons joined him. "Ho, ho, I know whom you mean," I said. "Those lean and hungry-looking creatures I sometimes see in the temple courts, walking about in the skins of wild animals. But tell me, who are they exactly, and what are their beliefs?" The old man answered wrathfully, "They ascribe all sorts of wretched human weaknesses to the eternal divinity. They drag down the Godhead to the level of petty human interests. They believe, for instance, that the Almighty, who has made his dwelling place in our holy temple, has nothing more important to do than occupy himself with the private affairs of every obscure individual. Instead of guiding the world and directing the destinies of the nations, with special reference to his own beloved people Israel, he is concerned with the tribulations of every little Essene, and not, mark you, in this world only, but in the world to come, where he has prepared a paradise for the good little Essenes, while he reserves for the wicked a flaming pit to which they have given the name of Gehenna. Drivel of this kind, about which there is not a word in the sacred Torah. But this isn't enough for them. They have provided the Eternal with a regular staff of beneficent and maleficent spirits who carry out his orders. They transfer the providential attention of God from the people of Israel in its entirety, the inheritor of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the tiniest private concerns of the individual. Thus the old man, speaking in Syrian Greek. "But surely," I exclaimed, "this is rank blasphemy. Why do you permit it? Why do you not proceed vigorously against these atheistic Jews?" "Blasphemy? You cannot exactly call it blasphemy or atheism, nor can we proceed against them on these grounds. Unfortunately, they are not the only ones to be infected with such follies, with the belief, for instance, that every man lives a second life in an imaginary world, and that his soul is purified in the heavens. There is among us, unfortunately, a big sect in which you will find people of no little prominence which shares these ridiculous views. It is composed of the scribes and of the Pharisees who interpret the words of our Torah not according to plain sense, but inject into them their own thoughts, which are repugnant to the traditions come down from Moses, our teacher. But I repeat that we cannot proceed against them. The unlettered masses are on the side of the interpreters of the law, and if we attempted to suppress them, and such attempts were made in the past, we should court the danger of splitting the nation, and this must be avoided. What insane, hysterical hopes they associate with their Messiah cult, and what dangers these boundless expectations can create. Perhaps I had better keep silent. You mean, I asked, rebellion against Rome, a general rising? I would not go so far as that, he answered with a show of caution. I will only say that their inflamed imagination transports them into very dangerous areas. One must not, of course, take their absurdities too seriously. You have heard it yourself. Their Messiah will awaken the dead from their graves. There was general laughter. Old Hanan turned to me. As if the burden of the law were not heavy enough, we have the Pharisaic members of the Sanhedrin who introduce intolerable difficulties into our criminal code, and in particular they complicate its procedure in the matter of capital offences. They interpose so many scruples, they find such subtle and far-fetched objections to common-sense evidence, they uncover such hair-splitting interpretations of the law, that the criminal can always find a loophole through which to escape. In effect, then, I observed, they are guilty of complicity with the criminal element. I should not be surprised if there is a secret understanding between them and the fanatics who stir up the people, both against your religion and our authority. Not exactly, the old man returned, reverting to his habitual caution. And still their tortuous subtleties are a direct encouragement to disorder, for they serve to weaken the law. Let me give you an instance of the new ideas which they read into the code. Our Torah states specifically that any man who assaults another and breaks off a tooth or gouges out an eye must pay for it with his own tooth or eye. Along come the quibblers and tell us that what the Torah meant was not literally an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but compensation therefore. What is this but encouragement of violence? Very true. This from one of the sons. And I added at once, well then, if the Jewish law is no longer capable of maintaining peace and order in Jerusalem, we, the Romans, will have to see to it. But now it seemed that with all his caution, the old man had gone further than he intended, for he turned pale at my words, and his sons looked at each other in alarm. At this moment there came to us, where we lay in the open hall of columns, the sound of distant shouting, distinct words, but they were in Aramaic, and I did not catch their meaning. But it was clear, from the changed expression on their faces, that old Hanan and his sons had understood them, or at least knew that they were meant for the priestly family. Slaves hastened in and drew the curtains between the columns to shut out the noise. For some seconds there was oppressive silence. Then the old man addressed himself to me. "This is because I invited you to eat at my table." What were they shouting? The sons stirred uncomfortably. "Why should he not know?" asked old Hanan. "It is a sort of song they have, ridiculing the high priests. To such a pass has it come, and to this level has the priesthood sunk. Theophilus, tell our Roman guest what they sing in the streets of Jerusalem against the highest authority, that is," he added hastily, "against the highest Jewish authority, the priesthood." Theophilus translated the words of the song into Latin. They ran approximately as follows: "Woe unto us because of the house of Beatus! Woe unto us because of their lead-loaded whips! Woe unto us because of the house of Ananus! Woe unto us because of their betrayals! They themselves have become high priests. They have made their sons into treasurers, and their sons-in-law into high officers, and their servants whip us with whips of lead." "And that," said the old man bitterly, "is our reward for our long and faithful service to the people." "The time has come to restore order in Jerusalem," I said. The old man nodded dubiously. His sons looked at me uncertainly, torn between gratitude and uneasiness.